The grand halls of Buckingham Palace have seen centuries of triumphs, scandals, and secrets. But some of the most unsettling stories were never told in the newspapers, never printed in the royal biographies, and never whispered beyond the palace walls. Until now. For decades, one royal carried himself as untouchable, a man whose temper and entitlement were shielded by the weight of his title. But behind the gold-trimmed curtains and ceremonial smiles, staff whispered a different truth. A truth about the Queen's own son, Prince Andrew. And when one young maid decided to speak, she shattered more than just silence, she fractured the illusion of royal nobility itself. This is the story of Charlotte Briggs, the maid who revealed the darker side of the Duke of York, and how her confession peeled back the layers of power, privilege, and fear inside Buckingham Palace. This year, royal watchers were startled by quiet whispers from the palace. Reports emerged that Prince Andrew, King Charles's younger brother, planned to step back from 2 annual Christmas traditions, breaking a decades-old pattern. The BBC cited royal sources, but no one needed official confirmation to sense the tension. Behind the smiles and speeches, something had shifted. Andrew's absence wasn't just a scheduling change, it was the echo of a reputation that could no longer be polished into respectability. And to understand why, we need to return to the beginning, when a young woman entered the palace, full of hope, unaware of the storm waiting inside. Charlotte Briggs was just 21, bright, humble, and full of pride when she received the offer that felt like destiny itself. For someone raised in a working-class British household, the idea of serving inside Buckingham Palace wasn't just a job, it was an honor. To Charlotte, the monarchy represented discipline, duty, and history. She imagined herself walking through majestic corridors, tending to rooms once graced by queens and kings, and serving a family that symbolized national pride. Her friends and family celebrated her achievement. To them, Charlotte had joined an institution of dignity and order. She, too, believed that the palace must be a place where kindness met professionalism, a home of tradition, not turmoil. But within days of stepping through those ornate gates, the illusion began to crack. Charlotte's first shock came when she learned where she'd been placed. She wouldn't be serving the Queen, nor Prince Charles, nor any gentle senior royal. Her assignment was with Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, a man palace staff quietly referred to as the most difficult royal of all. Among insiders, the post carried a reputation, a nightmare. Few wanted it, and those who held it rarely lasted long. At first, Charlotte tried to ignore the rumors. She thought, how bad could he really be? But within days, she found out. One morning, she entered Andrew's room to draw the curtains, a simple, ordinary task. She smoothed the drapes, stepped back, and checked the alignment. To her, it looked perfect. Moments later, the sound of heavy footsteps and a furious voice echoed through the room. Prince Andrew had arrived. He didn't greet her. He didn't even look at her at first. His eyes went straight to the window. "Who did this?" he barked. Charlotte froze. "That gap," he shouted, pointing at a sliver of sunlight cutting through the drapes. Before she could speak, the Duke erupted. His face turned red, his voice thundered through the halls. He berated her as though she had committed an act of treason. For the young maid, the humiliation was unbearable. Her hands trembled. She fought back tears as Andrew's rage filled the room. To others, it was just curtains. To him, it was control. After that morning, Charlotte learned that life in Prince Andrew's service was not about doing your job well, it was about surviving his moods. Even the smallest mistake could set him off. A book placed half an inch out of position. Shoes that gleamed but not to his exact liking. A towel folded wrong. Staff began to warn each other in hushed voices, "He's awake. He's in one of his moods. Tread carefully." They moved through the corridors like prey avoiding a predator, silently, cautiously, always listening for signs of danger. Andrew didn't just demand service. He demanded submission. If his temper was frightening, his habits were stranger still. At the center of his room sat a collection that baffled new staff, 72 stuffed animals, lined up with military precision. Bears, hippos, and other plush creatures sat perfectly arranged, each with a specific position on his bed. It wasn't a childhood keepsake, it was an obsession. Every toy had a designated spot, recorded in laminated instructions kept nearby. Staff were trained to place them exactly as the guide demanded, which toy touched which pillow, which direction they faced, and even the spacing between them. One wrong arrangement meant fury. Charlotte recalled how ridiculous it felt, grown adults spending hours positioning toys for a prince in his 40s. But refusal was never an option. The toys, like everything else, were about control. His other habits followed the same ritualistic pattern. Pajamas had to be folded precisely. His bed had to meet a secret standard only he understood. Even his pillows had rules. It wasn't about comfort, it was about dominance. Andrew would sometimes order staff to pass him items within arm's reach, or to stand silently as he dressed, not because he needed help, but because he wanted an audience. He demanded instant obedience, no matter the hour or the triviality of the request. The staff's whispered refrain became infamous among the palace corridors: "He treats people like objects. To him, we're disposable." They served not a royal, but a tyrant in a tailored suit. Whispers among senior staff suggested that this behavior didn't begin in adulthood. The roots, they said, went back to his childhood. As a boy, Andrew had a reputation for arrogance. He was said to mock guards, bully his younger brother Edward, and laugh when others got hurt. Palace insiders even claimed he earned nicknames: Baby Grumpling, for his constant whining, and the Snigger, for the cruel laugh he gave at others' misfortunes. A few rare staff had dared to push back. One stable hand, fed up with his taunts, reportedly shoved the young prince into a pile of horse dung. Another footman once punched him after an especially nasty insult. Even the queen herself, normally protective, admitted her son needed discipline. But those moments of correction were fleeting. Andrew grew up in a world where consequences rarely followed cruelty. And when a person never faces consequences, cruelty often hardens into entitlement. For decades, Buckingham Palace functioned like a fortress, not just of stone, but of silence. Stories of Andrew's behavior never left its walls. Loyal staff signed secrecy contracts. Journalists were quietly discouraged from probing too deeply. To criticize a prince was to challenge the monarchy itself. So, the tantrums continued. The staff endured. And the myth of royal perfection went on, unbroken, at least in public. Until Charlotte Briggs spoke. Years after leaving the palace, Charlotte decided she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She'd carried the memories, the shouting, the rituals, the humiliation, for too long. When she finally shared her experiences, her story made headlines. To the public, her words were shocking. To those who had worked in the palace, they were confirmation. She wasn't a bitter former employee. She was a witness to a truth long buried beneath royal polish. Her testimony wasn't about gossip. It was about power. About what happens when privilege shields cruelty for so long that it becomes routine. Charlotte's voice joined a growing chorus of insiders who could no longer bear the silence. Each account chipped away at the palace's facade, revealing that royalty, behind closed doors, could be disturbingly ordinary in their flaws, and, at times, monstrously so. When the world later saw Prince Andrew's public collapse, the friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the disastrous BBC interview, the loss of his royal titles, it seemed sudden, as if a man had fallen from grace overnight. But to those who had known him behind palace doors, it wasn't sudden at all. It was inevitable. Charlotte's story gave the world a glimpse of the man behind the scandals, a man conditioned by entitlement, unchecked by consequence, and insulated by wealth. The same arrogance that made him scold a maid for a sliver of sunlight was the same arrogance that blinded him to the storm that would eventually destroy his reputation. In a way, his downfall wasn't just personal, it was institutional. Charlotte's decision to speak broke an unspoken code that had protected the royal family for generations: never embarrass the royals. Inside the palace, loyalty wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Staff signed non-disclosure agreements. Families of employees were warned to avoid even casual gossip. Breaking silence meant risking livelihoods, reputations, and futures. The palace was more than a home, it was a machine of secrecy. For decades, that silence kept the fairy tale alive. The crowns, the ceremonies, the balcony waves, all built upon the quiet suffering of those forbidden to speak. But once the silence cracked, the illusion began to falter. Charlotte didn't come forward for revenge. She came forward because history, she believed, deserved honesty. Her account wasn't just about one man's temper, it was about a culture of deference so deep that cruelty could masquerade as authority. Her courage opened the door for others. More former palace employees began to share fragments of their experiences, each one adding another fissure to the facade. And with every revelation, the world's perception of the monarchy shifted. The palace, once seen as the symbol of stability, now seemed fragile, haunted by the very secrets it worked hardest to hide. The fall of Prince Andrew isn't just the story of a man undone by his own arrogance. It's a mirror held up to the institution that created him. What happens when a person is raised in a world where obedience replaces honesty, where appearance matters more than accountability, and where silence is considered loyalty? Charlotte's story forces that question into the light. If this was how a prince treated the people who served him, what else might have been hidden behind the palace's golden facade? How many other voices, still silenced by fear, hold stories we've never heard? In the end, perhaps the most unsettling truth about Prince Andrew isn't his tantrums or his teddy bears, it's the decades of silence that made them possible. For years, staff endured humiliation so the world could keep believing in crowns and fairy tales. They smiled through fear, carried out rituals of absurd precision, and told themselves it was all in service of something greater. But power, when unchecked, corrodes even the most sacred institutions. Charlotte Briggs's courage didn't just expose one man's behavior. It exposed the fragility of an entire system built on the idea that some people are beyond reproach. And that's what makes her story so powerful, and so dangerous. Because once silence breaks, it can never